This is your Other Brothers podcast.
It's like running through an open door. It's like finding what you're looking for. We've been waiting. We won't wait no more. We got a beautiful story. Every moment on and on. We got a beautiful story. And we've only just begun. The best is yet to come.
Welcome home, friends, to your Other Brothers podcast. We are a community navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. From the Jewel of the Blue Ridge of Asheville, North Carolina, my name is Tom, and I am so glad that you're here. Joining us today from the handprint of God, it is our other brother, Ben. What's up, Ben?
Hey Tom, what's up? Thanks for having me on yet again.
What's up? We can't keep Ben away. We also can't keep Will from the frozen tundra away. What's up, Will?
Hey, it's actually not frozen here right now, which is wonderful.
How is it not frozen in February of 2022, the year of our
It
Lord?
feels like spring. I have no idea what's going on in Alberta, but it feels like spring
Wow.
right now.
Praise the Lord. Wild Rose country of Alberta. That's right. It's good to have you here. I'm glad it's more Wild Rose than frozen tundra at this juncture. Although, didn't you mention to me that you've never seen a Wild Rose?
I
Or have
finally saw one like
Or you
last spring. So
Okay.
they're
So
beautiful.
They exist. It exists in this land that's named for them. I'm really excited. I mean, I'm always excited to see you guys, but I'm excited for this topic because this topic has a little bit of a backstory that sadly the Yobbers will never be able to hear, because I think it was in the aftermath of our last episode together. We did an episode on bitterness. And after that episode, after the recording stopped, for some reason, we got on a tangent talking about this concept of delayed adolescence or second adolescence. And we talked like easily another 10 or 15 minutes after that recording. And I felt so like sad/mad that the record button still wasn't going, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like, we're having a great conversation about this thing that's existed, but it's been hard to like put a finger on, like, what do we call this phenomenon in our community? Because we've noticed it. We've all noticed it. And we had this great conversation, and then we put it out like, why don't we just do an episode next time? And you guys agreed. And so here we are. And we're talking about this thing, this nebulous thing, which we're going to add layers to and define today, which I'm so excited for. I was struggling in the title, which obviously when this comes out, it will have a defined title. But what are your guys' thoughts before we even start talking about it? Delayed adolescence versus second adolescence. What do we feel about either of those?
I think that they're concepts that are tied together. So the idea of delayed adolescence, and again linked with second adolescence, is that for a lot of LGBTQ folks, there are certain developmental milestones that our peers get to have, whether that's heterosexual or those that are more out in their sexuality, that they get to go through that we don't necessarily go through when we're younger. And that's because we might be spending, the first, some of us, 15, 20, or some people even into their 30s are suppressing their sexuality and suppressing, sexual urges and desires. And so to unpack those later, it's not like you've grown maturity in those areas along with the rest of your development. So it's like you're right back to being a teenager and opening that box for the first time.
How about we call it just being young again?
The Being Young Again podcast. Yeah. Because we're all old now, or at least I am. I'll speak for myself.
I just turned 34, so I feel old.
Wow. You turned 34. I'm about to turn 35 in a couple months. Ben, do you choose to reveal your age?
Ben Rutkowski can be whatever age he chooses to be.
Ben's going to be anonymously aged. So you can imagine a 21-year-old if you want. You could imagine that. So delayed second adolescence. That was a little teaser. Very nice, Ben. Nice to lay it out. That's what we're talking about today. And so it'll be fun. We got so much feedback. Oh my gosh. Back-to-back episodes of incredible feedback. So we're gonna read a lot of stories today, and I'm thankful for all the Yobbers who participated. Before we get to that, though, you guys, the Super Bowl is coming, and you guys both preach on Sunday, right? How many football references will be in your sermon?
I don't think I've ever made a football reference ever. Actually, I'm not even sure if I've ever made a sports reference. The one time I called marching band a sport, and I'm pretty sure that's when everybody knew I was gay.
I mean, really though, if you are transporting like a tuba or something down the track, I mean, I think that's a sport, honestly. It's like weightlifting, basically.
It's kind of obligatory, regardless of sexuality, that anytime Michigan or Michigan State plays Ohio State, that for at least that day, you have to have some awareness of football if you live in Michigan. So, yeah, but there will be no Super Bowl references this Sunday.
So, question: when is the Super Bowl? And I'm actually not joking here.
So the Super Bowl is this Sunday. So the sermon you are about to preach is on Super Bowl Sunday. So take this as an opportunity to add some last minute notes to your sermons where you include a touchdown reference or I don't know.
I know some people here do watch the Super Bowl, but they're more interested in the CFL. So it's
in Canada, yes, the great white north. That is a whole nother league up there. But yeah, I wanted to mention it. I did a fun podcast, a convocast with my brother, and the whole premise of the podcast, in case anyone skipped it, in case anyone saw Super Bowl in the title of the episode and just decided not to listen to it.
Which is me.
The premise of it is it's to prep you so that when you're at a Super Bowl party this Sunday and you're there and there's football happening, you might be there for the food or the commercials or for the halftime show, but while the game is happening, you can now know, like, what are the things to look out for? My brother laid it out. Like, this is what's happening. This is who's playing. I brought in the element of this is how attractive the quarterbacks are. And then we laid it out for 20 minutes. And so that's a primer for anyone who skipped it. If you feel unprepared to go to Super Bowl Sunday with your friends, this is it. This is a 30-minute Super Bowl 101. So you guys can go back and listen to that if you missed it.
So if you're talking about attractive football players, maybe I should give it a listen to.
Yes. we reference at least 3 quarterbacks. And my brother, I'm just going to say, my brother called one of them gorgeous as a straight man. So I felt very validated to feel reciprocate. Like, I'm not just crazy, right? Like, my brother also agrees. So that was a fun episode. Always fun to have my brother Andy on the ConvoCast. And on the YOBcast. Hopefully we'll get him back on the YOBcast again soon. Before we get to our episode, you guys, this is really exciting because I've been starving for a voicemail. I've been looking at the YOB line. I have the metaphorical phone on my desk and I'm just staring at it, waiting for it to ring. And someone answered the call. Someone called the YOB line right after the bitterness episode, actually, that we did with Ben and Will last month. And really excited to hear. Well, I'll just play it. I'll play the feedback because it comes with a discussion question. And so I love the idea of episodes that bleed into episodes. And here is what he had to say.
Hey guys, Louis from Lafayette here. Thanks for doing the episode on bitterness. I think bitterness can sometimes, not quite always, but sometimes be an indicator of idolatry. For example, I was once so embittered against my home congregation after a confrontation with our elders that I couldn't even stand to be in the main auditorium with everyone. I just spam stewing in the foyer and wouldn't even put up with being there for very long. Even time away for a semester at college didn't reduce that intensity. But when I reached out to our evangelist about it, he patiently listened and convinced me I was actually being heard. Then he decided to help me by bringing me along on trips to an assisted living facility to visit with some brothers and sisters who had very few friends or family left. At first it was awkward and a bit forced for me, but I could see that I was actually being helpful. And I had our evangelist there to help and encourage this reaching of my comfort zone. And to my own amazement, it worked. My bitterness started to go away. Maybe because I got the sense I had a place in God's kingdom again. Whatever caused it to help, it stuck with me and I've since rebuilt those relational bridges. I went through all that to say that in the wake of it, I think I was seeking encouragement and affirmation, acceptance, reassurance, joy, and probably other things primarily from the church rather than from God. So because the church fell short of my God-level expectations and desires, I plunged so far into bitterness that my reaction actually confused our elders. I think what I did was make an idol out of the church. And it hit me in the wake of the podcast that maybe bitterness in general can be a sign of us making an idol out of something, taking from creation what we're meant to find first and foremost in our Creator. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
Thank you so much for that call. That was incredible. That was an incredible call. I love hearing from our listenership. Thank you for taking the initiative to do that. And this is kind of my hope for the Yob line. You know, it can be used to say, oh man, Will made such a funny joke on that last podcast, or Ben said something that I vehemently disagree with, and here's why. And so I love the idea that the Yob line could be used for that. But then I also love the idea that it could be an extension of the conversation. Like, here's a specific situation, a specific scenario that he laid out, this gripe with the local church. And now let's like carry the conversation on, not for the whole episode, but for, a couple minutes. Like, what do you guys think about that? Is all bitterness or most bitterness or some bitterness wrapped up in a sense of idolatry? Like, do we idolize things? Do we ascribe things value that can only be ascribed to God at the end of the day? What do you guys, as pastoral voices, how do you approach that issue of idolatry?
How theological should we get here?
As densely as you can.
You came to the right guys for denseness, definitely.
Yeah, so I'm thinking the triperspectival perspective of John Frame and his epistemology, and I'm throwing out words. None of that actually strings.
So many
together.
syllables.
So I'm kind of. It's hard to know with those sort of questions. Does it apply to every situation? But generally, I say it does. So I come from like a Reformed Christian background, and we tend to root our understanding of what's right or wrong within the Ten Commandments. So there's the first commandment that addresses idolatry, and then the 10th commandment addressing covetousness addresses issues of the heart, and those normally frame all of ethics. So both has the direction of our worship and where our heart is at. So both the outside and the inside actions. So I would say, in a sense, you probably could find idolatry within all situations of bitterness. Now, whether that's the main motivating factor or not, I'm not exactly sure. But that's my dense theological answer.
Okay. Any thoughts to add, Ben?
The question of whether or not bitterness is always sinful, I want to say at least sometimes it's morally neutral. I mean, the idea behind bitterness, it's related to grief, it's related to agony. And, the word used there for bitterness is actually more connected with poison than anything else, at least in the Old Testament. So the idea that to hold on to bitterness is to poison your heart, to poison your soul, to kind of deaden yourself, that it almost always leads to destruction in the long run. So from that side of things, if we're holding on to something we shouldn't be holding on to, yeah, that would be sinful. At the same time, people can try to move past their grief and not process things well, not process it in full. And in those instances, it ends up coming out sideways later. It ends up, kind of compounding the pain and potentially spilling out into other people as well. So my succinct answer, if we need one, is grief, properly felt, needs to be felt until its conclusion. It cannot be rushed. When it is held on to beyond the point that it should be, that's maybe where we should consider it to be poisonous, to be true bitterness, and that is destructive in whatever form it takes.
You know what our answers has kind of reminded me of? I was just reading The Fellowship of the Ring, and Frodo makes a comment to one of the elves that, like, this is why people never ask elves questions, because they give us both the positive and negative answer to every question. I feel like Ben and I just did that.
Wow. Lord of the Rings parallel. You guys are elves, basically.
Though I want to be more like Gimli, but that's.
I was gonna say I get more Gimli vibes from you, Will, but like I resonate with a little bit of this guy's story because he mentioned we don't know the specifics of this confrontation with a church elder, but like church politics. I mean, you guys know church politics is a real thing. It's super annoying and infuriating. Sometimes I've been in a situation in the past where like I was attending a church that I loved, that I really adored, and the associate pastor or the main pastor left, and that was a whole thing. And then the associate pastor was kind of left in this interim role for like 6 months, a year and a half. Like he was just in this purgatory of like, is he our pastor now or not? And the main leadership couldn't decide on it. And then people left the church and there's this whole big political thing. I was bitter. And I think it was valid. Like, I think it wasn't handled correctly. I think it was so clear to so many that this was not handled correctly. But then is the answer to that to stay bitter and to say, F the church, I'm not doing church anymore because it's messed up and there's messy people running it? Or is the answer then to take whatever that experience was and take it to the next thing and to hopefully see God renew and redeem what was broken and corrupted and lost? Because I definitely felt anti-church for a while after that. But I'm glad I didn't stay that way. I'm glad I didn't stay bitter, because if I did, I wouldn't be at the church that I am now. And that's not to say that this church won't disappoint me, because I think it certainly will. At some point, it'll disappoint me, or some one person or the elders or whoever will disappoint me. But man, I just feel like we can't stay bitter. We could be angry or we can be upset at injustice, or but then let's not stay there. And if it means going to a different church or joining a different group of believers, maybe that's the solution to it. But yeah, I guess I've always struggled with that concept of the church, of like idolizing the church, because I feel like the church needs to be something amazing, and we're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so when it doesn't do that, it feels just super disorienting and frustrating and angering to another degree.
Well, that's the thing with like righteous anger, and I guess you'd say biblical mourning. I mean, if you look at David in Psalm 63, he starts out, "Oh God, you are my God, and earnestly I seek you." It's a running after God. And you get to the end of the psalm, and he's like, "But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals." I mean, David's not exactly happy about whatever it is he's talking about. He's basically saying these people are going to be given over to destruction. Those are not the words of a happy person. And at the very end, though, he says, "But the king shall rejoice in God." So I feel like there can be these two tensions of both simultaneously praising God and acknowledging the painful situations that we've gone through that don't necessarily translate into bitterness.
This is how you can tell somebody's a good pastor, when they can just reference a psalm. Like that's a good work right there. And to go along with that too is we never know what's going on in the background as well. This is not to excuse any church leadership, but there's one of the things I've realized being on church leadership is there's so much happening in the background that most people don't realize, and that influences decisions way more than what people may think. And again, that's not to excuse a bad decision that somebody makes, but it is very complicated, and there's a lot of layers to everything that's going on.
Yeah, I know, for sure. Thank you for giving us that perspective from behind the holy veil, or whatever the metaphor is. It's good to hear from you guys. I hope this happens more often. I hope people call and that we can have like follow-up discussions on subsequent episodes. I mean, that's kind of the hope for the Yob line, is that it can give us something extra to talk about, to keep the conversation going. And so thank you for calling. As we talk about delayed or second adolescence today, if anything we say brings up a thought, brings up a story, brings up a perspective, please give us a call, 706-389-8009, and we will gladly feature you, assuming you don't swear or say like rated R things, or, keep it appropriate within the bounds of what Yob is all about.
So does that mean I shouldn't leave a voicemail?
You should not call. No, Will is forbidden from calling the Yob line. We already have you on the show. I already have to edit you enough as it is. So No, Will's great. Will's a gentleman. Couple announcements about book club. We're reading The Relational Soul this week. I've already heard from a few people who are reading this book that they are so glad that it was suggested. It was suggested by one of our community members who had read it and said it would be a great book club entry. And I agree. I'm halfway through it myself, thoroughly enjoying it. So we're having our book club gathering to talk about The Relational Soul on February 16th. And then a month later, on March 16th, we are reading Eve Tushnet's Gay and Catholic. And I'm excited to read that because I've only heard good things, mostly from, I feel like, non-Catholic people. Like I don't have many Catholic friends as it is, but people who have read this book and drawn so much value from it who aren't Catholic, like that's, I think, says a lot. So I'm looking forward to reading that with our yobbers next month. So the book club is so fun. I enjoy it every month. If you guys are interested in checking it out, go to our Patreon, patreon.com/yourotherbros, and we would love to have you. Will, is that a book you've read every book known to man? Have you ever read Eve's Gay and Catholic?
No, I haven't. I haven't read every book. So, but that is on
You've
my
read a
list.
lot. Okay. You should read it for book club. We miss you. We miss you at book club, Will.
I have a suggestion for book club. We should read Schleiermacher. Would that be? Do you think people would be into that?
What is that? I don't know what that is. There's a lot of syllables again.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
like using
totally,
syllables.
totally joking there. He's a theologian that introduced modern liberal theology, and I just had to read him recently for class, and he's a nightmare to read. So, yeah.
You see, we want to choose books that bring people to the table. We don't want to repel. We don't want to repel people.
His name is fun to say, Schleiermacher.
That is a fun one, Schleiermacher. Yeah. We'll put it on the list. We'll get to it 7 years from now, maybe. We'll see. Book club going strong. If it's going strong 7 years from now, maybe we'll give Schleiermacher a try. But in the meantime, Eve Tushnet, that's next on deck. And before we talk about this second wave of adolescence, we have to give love to our sponsor, Acne. Thank you, Acne, blessing our lives once again. Because it's not enough to go through once. Let's do it again. Let's go through it again, you guys.
You know, there is like a wonderful pleasure to like pinching a pimple and just having that pop. Like,
Gross. No. Do you like that show, like Dr. Pimple Popper? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
There's like a show on TLC or something, and that's all it is like oozing sores, and she like pops them. It's the grossest thing I've ever. I've never watched it.
It's like that one scene in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix where Filch pinches a pimple and it explodes all over the screen.
I don't recall that, but
that's how many times I've watched Harry Potter. I know which film exactly that.
You know, I've only seen those movies once each, I think. Just one and done, but I'm sorry.
I'm leaving. I'm out of here.
No, stay. I love the horse and his boy. Stay. Acne, yes, we love it. There actually isn't there a thing like adult onset acne? Like, don't people get acne in their older age? Isn't that a thing that happens?
I sure hope not.
Not to freak anyone out. I thought it was.
I'm scared. I'm
Maybe I'm just making it up.
What if that happens to me?
Or maybe what I'm thinking of is when babies, because I know babies can have acne because like their skin is getting used to the world, and so I know babies can get acne, but maybe I'm reversing it to old people.
Well, thanks for clearing that up, Tom.
Crystal clear skin. Yeah, we're grateful that the oozy sores and emotional sores of acne are adorning this episode.
I wonder how many people stopped listening to this episode, like hearing words like ooze, like it's as
ooze and pus and
yeah.
This is not a very attractive sponsorship today, but you got to follow the money trail wherever it leads, you know. As we mentioned at the top, this delayed adolescence, super fascinating concept, because this is something that as a leadership team, like it's something that I've just been keeping an eye on, and it's come up in leadership conversations. Like we have a Discord and we have a Facebook group for our community. And every once in a while, the conversation kind of just starts to get a little, I wouldn't use the language of off the rails. That feels a little intense, but But sometimes like, oh, we joke on this show. We haven't joked about it in a while actually, but we used to joke a lot about Pair of Thieves and being like the underwear brand of the show or this community even. And it's like come up as a joke time and time again. Like we had this little silly bracket that we did last year where people voted on things. And I think Pair of Thieves made it to the final four or something. Like people just voted on this this thing that's become part of yob culture. And every once in a while, like I'm just picking out a specific example that kind of ties into this topic, but then every once in a while we just start talking about underwear and we start talking about underwear brands and what do you wear and what do I wear? And I tried this out and I ordered this kind, or I didn't like it, or I love this now. And it's like, on the one hand, it's kind of cool that this is a community where a topic like underwear or a topic like following Jesus can coexist in the same community. But then on the other hand, it's like, I don't know, is this becoming problematic? Are people distracted by all the underwear talk? Is it producing distraction in one sense or temptation, unnecessary thoughts in another sense, if we're imagining our community members in their underwear or something? Like if people follow that trail of thoughts, like, and I think that is such a snapshot of what we're talking about today, because it's like when I was a kid, when I was growing up, I didn't get to talk with friends about what kind of underwear. I could see in the locker room that they were all wearing boxer shorts and I was not. And I was like, why is that? When did this happen? How did I miss out on that switch, on that change, And so you go down the line, whether it's talking about sex, whether it's talking about masturbation, talking about pornography or watching pornography, like a lot of these like super heavy things that weren't talked about or discussed either in homes, families, or with peers in school or at church. Like all of a sudden now, 10, 20, sometimes 30, 40, 50 years later, there's suddenly a conduit. There's an outlet for this type of conversation. And sometimes it almost feels like we're a bunch of 12-year-olds laughing at inappropriate things or having these conversations. But it's this part of liberation, but then it's also part, I think sometimes it can get a little obsessive or a little inappropriate. And so that's kind of what we're wading through today, is just like, how do we name what this is? And then how do we move forward? Did I kind of lay it out well?
Yeah, though I do want to make a somewhat serious disclaimer, I guess, in one sense. Now, I am not a therapist, so I could be totally wrong in my understanding of this area. But like when I first heard delayed adolescence, I heard that term quite a bit in conversion therapy. And there was this idea that like the reason why we're gay is because our adolescence was disrupted. Like either we didn't have a good relationship with our father, and that changed our experience during adolescence, and that's why we're gay. So I think it's important to make the distinction that that's not what we're talking about. Quite often, the delayed adolescence that we experience is because we are attracted to the same sex and we have a totally different experience from people, like portions of our growing up are delayed because we're like constantly in fear and afraid of how other people react. So I think it's important to begin with that distinction that like if there are others who went to conversion therapy, we're not talking about that. At least I hope not. Are we? Otherwise I'm leaving.
This is a surprise intervention, Will. That's what we're talking about today. Is conversion therapy. You're making me use the bleep button, Will, after we just joked that you don't swear.
I am so sorry.
It just came out. No, we're not talking about conversion therapy, although I'm glad you bring that perspective to the mix, because that was not even on my radar. So I'm glad you even put that out there, that is not what we're talking about today.
Again, the question of delayed versus second. I mean, okay, so there's a decent amount of guys from within the community that did go through something of an adolescence, had conversations with other guys about girls, kind of in some instances, not being aware of their own sexuality or suppressing it. And so they got to go through the experiences of, having their first kiss, going on their first date, talking with their friends about, who they found attractive. But on some level, for some people, there's that disconnect of deep down, do we know that there's not as much excitement as there is for our peers? And so then, when there's an actual acknowledgement of sexuality and orientation, suddenly we're opening up these boxes, and the translation from our, I'll call it a stunted adolescence, or maybe for some people pretend adolescence, not to put words in people's mouths, but don't necessarily translate over to our 20 or 30-year-old selves, navigating conversations around who do we find attractive, and for that matter, what do we do with these attractions, now that we're in our 20s and 30s? How do we approach them? I think one of the other factors that gets talked about, or maybe not, is the level of consequence. So if teenagers cross a line sexually, they'll get scolded by their parents. There might be repercussions. What about adult sexual minorities going through, for some, their first adolescence, or delayed, whatever you want to call it, second adolescence, and their pastor or their church finds out that they, as an adult, have engaged sexually or experimented? There's, in a lot of instances, a greater amount of consequence for those people as adults experiencing these things and going through them, even though they haven't had the frame of reference like their peers had back when they were, teenagers.
Yeah, to add on to that, like you mentioned dating, like that's always been the biggest struggle for me because I've always wanted to go on a date. I've always wanted to know what that experience is like, and like just not having those experiences. Sometimes I feel like I am less of a human, and it causes me to just kind of go through things again. Like one of my biggest struggles has always been romantic comedies or romantic movies and whatnot, because it's like even though those aren't like bad, it's not the same level as watching porn. It puts my heart in a similar spot though, where I'm constantly wanting to be in a totally different situation. I want to experience this thing, and it's like I think that's an effect of not going through those experiences that everybody else gets to go through. So you're constantly thinking like, oh, what would have that been like if I went through it?
Yeah. Let's just go there. I was going to save this story for towards the end, but let's just dive right into, you brought up dating, because I see such a parallel. I've never gone on a date. I've never had a girlfriend or a boyfriend for that matter, but I've never dated. And so I think a lot of guys in our community, I mean, I'll certainly speak for myself, but I have a feeling a lot of guys in our community will relate with the idea of befriending other side B guys, whether within YOB or, going to these conferences or whatever they meet. There's lots of other groups out there. Developing like really close, really intimate, really good, great even friendships with people. And then some sort of conflict happens, some sort of, whether it's communication or whether it's physical boundaries or whatever. And all of a sudden the bomb goes off. There's this huge breakup or this huge conflict, this huge breakup. And it feels like, I mean, I've been there multiple times. Like it just feels like I'm experiencing what all of those 13, 14, 15-year-olds would experience when their worlds exploded and their girlfriend dumped them, or like that's what it's felt like. It's felt like as a 20 something, as even a 30 something, it's felt like I was never equipped to handle that, or I just never went through that as a teenager. And now all of a sudden I'm navigating, I mean, it's same sex intimacy and it's, platonic and it's friendship and it's not necessarily romantic or sexual, but it's still like this really deep, heavy, close, important relationship that suddenly either goes through a really hard time or just disappears and explodes and goes away entirely. And it's been catastrophic. Like it's been extreme. Those are some of my hardest times of life, have been either trying to repair these friendships or letting them go. And I think of that when I think of second adolescence. I think I'm going to lean towards second adolescence versus delayed adolescence when we talk about this, but because I went through an adolescence, but my first adolescence didn't have any kind of like dating foundation that would serve me well in the future dealing with other intimate relationships, because I just felt totally ill prepared for all of these experiences. And I know other guys have had some really hard friend breakup stories.
One of the funny things, like I think I prefer second adolescence as well instead of delayed, because during my first adolescence, I thought I had wonderful self-control compared to all my friends. Like, I'm like, man, I am good at this purity thing. And then I
Me
realized,
too.
yeah.
Oh, yes,
Then I
for
realized,
sure.
like,
Having
oh,
sex, that's no big deal.
yeah, I'm like, I don't want to have sex. This is great. I'm like, oh, I do want to have sex. Oh, crap. Like,
That's funny. Yeah, no, I felt like such a good Christian kid back then. I was like, why are all these kids? There was one kid in my class he would like carry a picture of a naked girl in his wallet. And I was like, what is that? How could you be so low? It's like, Lord knows what was swimming around inside of my head at that time. I wanted to read some feedback from lots of different age brackets. If you guys have any thoughts to share on these comments from the Yobbers, big shout out to the Yobbers. You guys came through. I'm hoping to do this more often. We used to take a lot of Yobber feedback in the past, and then we kind of just stopped for a while. I think a lot of that was because of poor scheduling and just not preparing well for these podcasts as far as giving them enough time in between recordings to respond. But hopefully we'll do this more often, because I just loved hearing, and we posted this on our Discord, and we got like 10 or 15 different responses, and it was so great. So here's what somebody said. He said, while at 24, I don't feel super far removed from my first adolescence, I can definitely relate to that feeling of being free to discuss taboo topics. I grew up in a super conservative culture that didn't talk about sex, period, and adult nudity is non-existent in any shared context outside of a context of a married couple in a bedroom. It never bothered me much growing up, though I was as curious as the next teenager and sated some of that curiosity by reading an uncensored Encyclopedia Britannica set I had access to, which we have definitely brought that up in the past. I think they even sponsored, not Encyclopedia Britannica, but encyclopedias. They sponsored an episode once when we were talking about the sex talk. I think it was the sex talk episode, which a surprising, scary number of our community have still not received. Still waiting for it.
same with me. I'm still waiting for it.
I think we all are. Maybe in paradise we'll receive the sex talk from Jesus.
When marriage is no longer a thing.
When marriage and sex are no longer things, we'll finally understand what it's all about.
Suppressed childhood memory that just came up. Bring up Encyclopedia Britannica.
I need a suppressed childhood memory sound effect. Unearthed. Bing. What is it?
Third grade. There was some sort of like world culture book in our classroom. And I remember, opening up the book and like looking at different cultural things. And I bet you it was probably Russia. There was this pool scene with all of these men and boys and, like just any age bracket whatsoever, just a men's pool thing. And all of them were naked. And I remember even third grade just being like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And just kind of fixating on that. Did not remember that until now.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we'll be able to unearth more things today.
Well, I was going to say, I remember having a similar experience. It was probably third or fourth grade. And I opened up an encyclopedia to the statue of David. And I remember just like staring at that for hours. And it's just like, why am I mesmerized by it?
David, have you thought about meeting David in heaven? Oh my goodness. That's going to be something else, you guys.
Okay, here's a question, and this is part 1 of 2, not a non sequitur. Have you ever had the experience where you become friends with another side B person on Facebook, and one of the first things you do is go, photo button, click?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We all do it. We all click on the photos, and we're all saying, did they go to the beach one day? Did they post about it? Like, I feel like that's common especially on Facebook. Oh my goodness. If you start becoming friends with like 2 or 3 other side B people, all of a sudden it becomes like the recommended friend feature will just give you an endless stream. Like there is no end. There's no end to the recommended side B friends you could make on Facebook, whether you're part of Yob or not.
Wait, you look at pictures? I normally look to see if they are like fans of Beowulf or from Iceland.
Oh my gosh. That's for any of the Enneagram 5s listening. That's what you guys do. But for the rest of us, we might be a little more visual.
So, like, part of the reason, like, why does that happen? I think before there was this element of maybe we came out to ourselves when we were younger. But I think that once that box is opened and sexuality is acknowledged, then even within common friend groups, there's still that curiosity of what do other guys look like. And I feel like in some sense, it's different than the former, the repressed, the secretly running to porn versus normalizing, peers and seeing that they are another person that's just like me. Can they get taken to a sexual space? The answer is yes. Does it necessarily do so? No. And I think that's, one of the things that gets brought up in community as well is this idea of why do people really appreciate, at least at some point in their lives, going to places like the Korean spa or, Russian bathhouse or, something like that, is that normalizing experience that a lot of guys got in high school, being on a football team or, after gym, where a lot of us that were in the closet, a lot of us that hadn't acknowledged our sexuality to ourselves, we hid from those situations. We changed somewhere else, we hid. Is bringing that forward into our, our 20s or our 30s and sometimes experiencing those for the first time.
Not long after I joined YOB, I actually did make a trip to Iceland, which is like a country that I'm obsessed about. I dream about often. Like I love everything about Iceland.
You look like you're from Iceland.
Yeah,
You have that look.
That's the best compliment anybody could give me. But I remember in Icelandic hot springs, like even their public pools, which has water from the hot springs, they don't add chlorine to anything. So like when you go into them, everybody has to take a shower naked, and there's a guard there to inspect that you're actually washing everything. Like they take the hygiene seriously.
Really?
Yeah, wow. It's a little weird. But me not ever having a locker room environment, like it was a tough experience for me. It was because for some odd reason, I'm like, is this something that my brain will take in a sexual direction? And then I realized, no, this is real humans being real people. And many of us have never had those experiences that this is what real humanity is like. It doesn't have to be sexualized whatsoever.
Yeah. So did you enjoy that experience? Was it a positive experience or just neutral?
It ended up being a very positive experience, but I went multiple times because of the first experience, I was so almost had an emotional meltdown because I'm I don't know how to respond to this. And then the second experience was oh, this is nothing big at all.
Yeah.
I'm
glad you brought it up. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, Ben, about Korean spas or locker rooms. I think that's another bread and butter. That totally fits into this conversation that we're having. Because that was me. When I was a kid, I didn't play. I ran cross country, and that was the extent of my athletic involvement. Cross country is a sport, I will say. That is definitely a sport. People will say that running is not a sport, but yeah, in a locker room, sometimes I'd be in there when the basketball players would be, or the football players, or I think the football players had their own locker room, but basketball players or some other team would be there. And sometimes the showers would be utilized. Sometimes they wouldn't. And that was always just something that was totally not even an option. I am not going to take a shower with other men. That is something that, and to this day, that is still, I know there are a lot of guys who in our community who have found a lot of healing and a lot of just growth and a sense of confidence, both in their own bodies and then also just being with other men in those types of situations. So I'm not here to say that that's correct or incorrect, but I know for me, that's not been a part of my story. That to this day, it's the thought of showering in a room with other men, does not produce feelings of triumph or confidence. I want my space. I want stalls. I can't do urinals without the little walls in between the urinals. I need separation. I need my own zone. But maybe part of my future growth will be branching out. Who knows?
One of the blog posts that I wrote, I think it's called "Naked and Unashamed in the Locker Room," was my first really big locker room experience. And it was with my best friend. And there was this question of, is this going to be arousing or not? And it actually was just me and him to start out. But then the basketball team got done practicing, and they all came in. So, it's like I went through a baptism by fire there a little bit, my first locker room experience, and realized like this is ridiculous. Like this is like a B movie scenario of a kid in the closet is what it is, and just I laughed and it broke the tension in my head, and just it was just very normalizing. Wasn't an arousing experience. And I realized I was just another one of the guys for sure.
Yeah, and a similar experience for me is I'll never forget the first time I changed in a locker room. And this was after my Iceland experience. And this was with a friend, but this is with a friend that knew about me. And I'm just like, I don't want to be in this experience because, like, oftentimes they don't know that you're gay, but my friend does. And that was actually a healing experience because he changed no problem. Like he didn't have any issues. Like most of the issues were like on my side trying to process this. Like, is this going to be a problem that I'm changing in front of a friend that knows about me? But it ended up being a very good healing experience because it wasn't like really that crazy of an experience.
Yeah, well, we're a bunch of millennials, and I read that comment from a yobber who is 24. So I wanted to give some loves, a shout out to our older folks. Our older folks sounds demeaning. Our the best generation, is that what they're called? We'll give it to them. We give them some love too. Here's what a couple of them had to say. As a 60-year-old, I find myself a bit envious at times of today's LGBTQ youth, teens and 20-somethings. So many schools, colleges, and communities have clubs and organizations, safe spaces for them to be real, who they are without fear of being judged, rejected, or beaten up. I can't tell you how many times I wished I had close gay friends when I was dealing with my own emotional journey regarding sexuality, but that has never been the case, primarily because of when I was born. So my heart goes out to somebody who was just born in a completely different time. And like we had, every generation has their struggles and has their issues. But I mean, my heart goes out to if it was hard for millennials in certain parts of the country to deal with being gay or attracted to the same sex, I can't imagine like 50, 60, 70-year-olds who also had to deal with that.
I will never forget one of the most important pastoral visits for me. Somebody in my church was like, a great uncle of mine is gay, just came out, and would like a visit from a pastor before he died. So he was like 92, 93. And I I went and visited him, and the first words he says was I was born gay. Like it was like you could see he was processing in 92 these experiences that he was never able to process his entire life. And I can never fathom how he made it to 92 because like I was falling apart at the seams before I came out to people at like I think I was like 28, 29. And it's like he was 92 and he was still somehow functioning. I don't know how he did it. So yeah, like the older people have my greatest respect because I could barely make it. And just to go your entire life dealing with this in the dark is just, it shows incredible resilience.
Yeah, no, I echo that. Someone else commented, I didn't have so much a second adolescence as a decades long one. I was bullied in school, so I kind of got stuck in that phase and kept reliving it, trying to work it out. I look back to my 20s and 30s and see a lot of adolescent immaturity in my attitudes and actions as a young adult. I've always gravitated towards friends who are much younger than me. I got married at age 34 to a wife who is 10 years younger than me. I didn't feel like I figured out who I needed to be career-wise until I was in my 40s. I didn't come out to myself until I was in my 50s, mid-50s. I think it was only then that this lifelong adolescence began to resolve, and I was fully able to embrace being an adult. At age 61, it's about time. So growth is a journey. It's like it doesn't just necessarily happen in 1 or 2 years as maybe puberty or adolescence might tie up a lot of things for certain people. But yeah, it can be a journey. It can be full of growth.
So one of the questions is, why can't sexual minorities be themselves the first time around? And this is from a licensed clinical social worker by the name of Jesse Kahn. Says homophobic and heteronormative, transphobic, and cisnormative narratives, as well as governmental policies and cultural norms in religion, families, schools, social spaces, laws, and various other institutions, all contribute to people suppressing or fearing their sexualities and sexual orientations. It's almost like, because of the institutions that are in place, we learn from a very young age, don't be different. If you don't meet the norm, don't say anything about it. Don't show it, because you know you're going to get stepped on. So for those from a previous generation, where the consequences in some cases were much bigger, where gay men were subjected to lobotomies and electroshock therapy, it makes a lot of sense why they held on as long as they did, because the consequences were so much greater. And one of the things that they're seeing in the counseling world now is the younger a person is, the easier, and I put air quotes around easier because there's still a lot of hurdles. The easier it is to come out, the easier it is to process with family and friends a person's sexuality, because it's become more commonplace to talk about in society. That having been said, called a mini research project, I put out a questionnaire to a number of sexual minorities, and of the over 20 responses I've gotten so far, only one person, has said that they don't need to watch what they say around heterosexual people. They don't feel the need to filter. Everybody else, to some degree, even if they're out, still feels the need to filter about some of their experiences because it just doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, that's a good segue to, there's, the Yobbers went 7 different directions, which I'm glad. There's so much diversity to this topic. But that kind of starts to break into the territory of, I subtitled each of these, the good and the naughty boys. And so I wanted to read what one person said. He said, "I was one of those boys who could have probably been considered prudish. When others would have something naughty to say, I would stay out of it because of my attractions. I have a feeling many of us here probably felt that way." I can feel that way too, of like being a part, even though I went to Christian schools are filled with the worst, dirtiest kids, is what I've come to determine. Maybe I'm just very biased against the one that I went to, but these boys, oh my gosh, the things that they said, like when the teacher was 3 feet away, even like, just horrific sexual things. And I like couldn't participate. Like I had to wear a front. I couldn't make those jokes. I had to be the good kid. Meanwhile, again, all those thoughts and fantasies and images floating around in my head, like there was such a divide that I couldn't let loose and be and do and say everything else that all the other boys were saying and being and doing. Like I definitely resonate with that. And it seemed like a lot of people in the community tended to agree with that. They had to watch what they said because they had to put up a front, either to be the good kid or, there was another blog written, I think recently, that you have to like put on a front of uber masculinity. Like maybe you take it the other direction and you have to portray yourself as super masculine. Actually, Will, you did a film review on Handsome Devil, which was such a pull. Like, oh man, I remember watching that movie years ago.
I love
but
that film.
That's what one of the main characters has to do, is he has to be like the star rugby player. He has to be the super attractive, athletic, confident one. Meanwhile, I mean, I guess spoiler alert. Oops, I should have said spoiler alert. Meanwhile, he's very gay and is coming to grips with that in high school.
Yeah, though at this point, I kind of want to say a possible positive to having the second adolescence is because we were forced in a situation, we had to be very aware of everything that we said and aware of everybody else's reactions. And again, I'm not an expert in these areas, but just an observation that there seems to be a tendency that LGBTQ people are just more emotionally intelligent because we've had to be like watch and observe everything very carefully. And there's some downsides to that, but I think there's a lot of upsides, like being a pastor and being able to be aware of everything that's happening and people's reactions has just been invaluable. So that's a possible positive to this, but yeah, back to Handsome Devil. Sorry, like every time that movie comes up, it really is my favorite film. It's
Like ever?
it's
All
close
time?
to it. It's
Wow.
behind the Lord of the Rings, and Waking Ned Divine. If anybody's ever watched that film, it's probably fourth. And so
Oh, Ben has.
Ben,
Ben's got a
Ben,
huge
you've
reaction.
seen Waking Ned Divine?
Definitely yes. One of mine and Marie's favorite movies. We watch it a couple times a year. Yeah.
The only film where there's a male nudity and I don't stumble.
Okay.
I mean, to be fair,
it's
it's like a 70-year-old and 80-year-old butt cheeks flapping in the wind. So, I mean, one of the guys is on a motorcycle going 50 miles an hour. So
you paint a lovely picture for
You're
the
welcome.
audience.
That will be my next side B movie review.
We're starting to get more film reviews now, yeah. So we're probably going to create a section on our website soon where you can read all the book, film, and TV reviews because we have so many now from our community. So
yeah, but one thing I do want to bring up about like the second adolescence is like it does seem to produce very compulsive behaviors. So like in Handsome Devil as an example again, like the gay athletic kid is going to gay bars and like he's doing it secretively and whatnot. It produces this compulsive behavior, and I think that is a tendency, or I'm assuming it's a tendency in our community, like people constantly like I don't know going to underwear websites or like not even like compulsiveness with porn, but like there is a compulsive behavior that um, that happens because because of the second adolescence experience.
yeah. And going back to just the other boys, like I think there's a compulsive inappropriateness. Like it's fun to be inappropriate, to say inappropriate things, to push the envelope a little bit, to kind of re-experience what we missed out on. If some of us felt like we couldn't be inappropriate as a kid because we had to put up a front, now all of a sudden we have a safe group of people, hopefully a safe community to be able to like let loose a little bit and to push that envelope. And I've noticed that tendency in myself. Like I won't point the finger at all the yobbers, but like I know I notice it in myself too. Like I want to crack an inappropriate joke about penises or whatever the topic is. And I've just had to learn to scale back. Like sometimes it can be fun and it can be chummy to be one of the guys and to make a joke, but then sometimes it can be off-putting and sometimes it can feel immature as well, just depending on the setting. So that's just something I've been mindful of through this experiment.
Well, even among non-religious gay authors that have explored this concept of second adolescence, one author I worry that the concept of an LGBTQ second adolescence can be misused to justify immaturity, recklessness, and unjustifiable harm doing, all while evading the possibility of holding perpetrators of this harm accountable. So, this idea of people end up doing reckless behavior, and sometimes it's, with people from within our own community, and it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. And then there's this idea of this thing happened to me. Do I dare talk about it? Because it's not, just talking about my stuff. It's talking about this person's stuff, and we share all the same friends. And then that can put people into this kind of shame spiral. What do people do when they're in a space of shame? Sometimes they run back to the very same behavior that put them there to begin with. And unfortunately, we end up with a lot of self-harm or harm to others within the community as well. That's a negative of the second adolescence. And I mean, this could be a whole nother topic. Me and my processing of sexuality, I mentioned before that I came out to Marie before we got married, but we didn't unpack that again. Like we put it in the box and didn't talk about it for 6 years, and, until 6 years into marriage for the second time around. Got plugged in with Side B community, and let me preface by saying this wasn't with somebody from your other brothers, but were there warning signs? Yes, in hindsight there were, or there was a person that I had established a friendship with that I trusted, and eventually that person took advantage of me and sexually assaulted me. And that's something that needs to get talked about as well. It's not just in the I want to be careful how I say this. It's not just in those heathen pagans who don't know Jesus. It's in the context of Psi B community as well, that there are people who cross lines and cross boundaries. And I remember the next day, the person was in the kitchen and they were singing, some sort of praise and worship song as if nothing had ever happened. So, there's positives in second adolescence, there's negatives, there's some areas we're more mature in, and there's things that also, need to get addressed because they also cause harm.
Yeah. Ben, thank you for sharing that, because I know that's an unfortunately common story in side B circles of similar things happening. And I absolutely would love to do a podcast devoted to that, and having the time and space to like really flesh that out and talk about that. So thank you for bringing that up here. I'm curious if I think shifting gears a lot from that, how do you guys view girls? I know one of you's married to one. Because there is, for me, a lot of guys in our community will resonate with this part of my story, which is having a lot of friends who are girls growing up, and then all of a sudden discovering this side B universe, and then shifting, and all of a sudden now I'm obsessed in a negative sense, but also just a lot of it motivated by growth and by healing of trying to connect with other men. And so then my life has been dominated in my adult years of trying to connect with other men, either through the side B world or at my church or whatever, just trying to connect with men. And all of a sudden women have gone on the back burner. And I've kind of come to this realization in the last few years, oh my gosh, where are all the women that I used to have in my life? Because I still have a few female friends, but not so much anymore. Because I just laughed out loud when this one person commented. He said, at one point I realized that I kind of forgot about women because I was focusing so much on finding healing through making friendships with other men, something which I lacked growing up. I guess I should find female friends again, LOL. So I'm curious if that resonates at all with you, or if you guys have a completely different take on that. Because I definitely I feel like this has been middle school, high school again, where it's my life is so dominated by being around the other boys. And at some point I have to look across the room and be oh wait, there's girls here. And look how attractive they're. Not to be romantically pursuing a girl, but just to have balance in my life and to have more female voices speaking into my life, I think would be a good thing.
One of the things that my experience is often different from guys in the side B world, though I know some guys with a similar experience to me, is I never really actually struggled with my masculinity. Never really an issue for me to interact with other guys. Maybe it's because I look like a mix between Hagrid and a lumberjack, but it's I've never struggled with other guys. So in my adult years, I interacted with women quite often. A lot of my closest friends are women, and it's I don't feel this pressure to this internal pressure to have male friends because I've always had male friends. So that's one of the things I recognize that my experience is often different with how comfortable I feel with other men. So that does change somebody's experience with women quite a bit, I think.
One of the things in the conservative evangelical world, and I know that this varies region to region, but Marie and I talked about this. This was her experience too, that you don't talk to a member of the opposite sex when you're in, high school, especially late high school, going into college, unless you are evaluating that person as a potential spouse. Can we pause and talk about how toxic that is to only be able to engage with somebody to evaluate them about whether or not they're actually, marriage material? And then when you are married, you can talk to a member of the opposite sex so long as they are married to a member, of the opposite sex for them. So I can talk to somebody else's wife. If that person's husband is not there, it feels very weird, or did feel very weird to get into conversations with that woman alone without her husband somewhere around. and this is something thankfully the church at large is starting to recognize, but the church doesn't just need a better theology of sexuality, it needs a better theology of friendship. Because what does it say that we can't view our brothers or sisters in Christ except as potential mates? I mean, that's toxic. So for me, in high school, I felt like I had a fair mix of friends that were men and women. And, even as an adult now, I feel like that is still there. I think it has shifted a little bit more to be more guys. But again, part of that is for the aforementioned reason. That having been said, though, I mean, I am very far removed from most of the people in my church. Most of them are older. It's easy to connect with the older women. It's really easy to have conversations with them. And there's not like this gender barrier there, I think, because of the age difference, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, older women are so great. It's such a shame that I can't land a cougar, you guys. That would be the match made in heaven, because old ladies love me. I used to love when I drove Uber and Lyft. My favorite rides by far were the old lady rides, because they would get in the car. They would be so just enamored with me. I'm just saying reality. They just loved me, and they would tip me well. I mean, the whole point of it is give me a good tip, right? And so the old lady rides, they always gave me great tips, and I was like, this is where I should be. This is what I should be doing with my life.
I so badly want to talk about the movie Harold and Maude, but I do not recommend that movie unless if you like it, then I do. Okay, so that crosses many, many boundaries, so I don't recommend it. But anyway, can I get into some deep theology here? Is that
please?
Okay.
Take 2 minutes to go to deep theology corner.
Okay, so I'm just gonna dive right into Karl Barth, the wonderful Swiss Reformed theologian from the mid 1900s. He has a wonderful understanding of gender. Well, he has a lot of flaws too, but anyway, he talks about, like, since we're made in the image of God, male and female, it's not just in the marriage relationship that fully represents God, but it's the interaction of men and women in general with each other in healthy ways that represent the fullness of God. So if we don't interact with women and only interact with men, we are not actually representing the fullness of God. It is essential for us to interact with women, and I think a lot of us in the side B community need to hear that and to like follow that. Like, it will make you a fuller representation of God if you have healthy interaction with women in the church and outside the church. Not just
well said. Very well said.
Yeah. And it's good to hear that. It's good for me to hear that. And hopefully it's good for our community to hear that too. Because that's not to take away at all from the great friendships you can make with other side B people or other men in general, locally where you live. Like, that's, I think we clearly in our community need, I mean, all men need men, but I think us in our community, especially, we need men in our lives. We need male peers, but let us not lose sight of beautiful females, whether we find them physically beautiful or otherwise. Like, they have something to offer us, and we have something to offer them as well. And so I definitely encourage people to befriend a woman today. That's one of my missions for 2022 is, can I make a new female friend this year? I hope so.
This is really a second adolescence befriend a female today. Like, it's like yeah. Are we in high school again? Like,
that's better than where I went. I was thinking this like an adopt a puppy type thing, but that's where my mind went. So yeah,
exactly. Closing the conversation down, I wanted to focus on peers and role models. So we had a lot of thoughts on those two topics. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple of thoughts on peers and get your guys' thoughts, and then finish off with role models too. One of our yobbers said this: effectively, I felt like I had no peers. It's a bit like being an alien dressed up as a human. You know you're different even if your friends have no clue. The fear of talking about it at that stage is just too great, especially when you're someone who is honestly fearful about acting on any of the feelings because of your faith and social circles. And someone else responded, I definitely resonate with others' feelings of having no peers, as well as a failed relationship friendship in my case, triggering a second adolescence of sorts. I attended small Christian schools where class sizes never exceeded 25. So if you didn't fit in with the boys, your only option were the girls or any other kids banished from the boys or the girls. During my entire K-12 career, the boys made it abundantly clear I was not one of them. I was also delayed developmentally, likely due to a chronic health issue I was born with, which made everything 10 times worse. And I can resonate, like my heart goes out to that because I feel that, like I always felt relegated. I've talked about it on the podcast several times, I think, but like our class being 90% uber athletic, and I ran cross country, which again is still a sport, but it's not football, it's not basketball, it's not baseball, it's not the holy trinity of high school sports. And so I just felt relegated to the unathletic kids, to the band kids, or the kids who didn't do any extracurriculars, like those boys. It just kind of felt like a purgatory of no connection, no relationship, no interconnectedness to this thing that I was hungering for, this masculinity, this brotherhood that was so evident. The football players, they were so brotherly, like they just had such a vibe with each other, and I just couldn't imagine that. I could not ever imagine that for myself. And so I feel kind of, again, this new birth, like I'm experiencing now through Yob and through other outlets too. But I mean, Yob has been the big one for me, of connecting with other peers. And again, it just produces this sense of camaraderie that I maybe should have, or it's more, I have to mourn that I didn't have that growing up.
One of the great difficulties, I'm not sure will ever go away with side B people, is the fact that we are different. And I think the differences will get more noticeable as we get older, because like all my friends are married with a couple of kids. And every time, even though I feel very comfortable around them, every time I get together with them, it's I can't help but just feeling very different. It's my life is 100% different from theirs. But I think what we also need to do, though, is to see difference as a positive thing. So let's go back to my favorite movie, Handsome Devil, here, where the teacher says, if you use somebody else's voice, who is going to be you? Like, it's being different is not a bad thing. It does take adjustment. It does take adjustment, realizing that your life is very different from everybody else, and your experience, like, you can't relate to other people's experiences, but your life is incredibly valuable and adds so much to church communities and to other people's lives, that like we need to like turn the difference that we have with our peers into something that's really positive, because it is.
It's taken me a while to get there, Will, and maybe I'm still not there yet, but I agree. There's beauty in the differentness, and we definitely have something to offer. Last thing I wanted to talk about was role models. I thought this was a fitting way to end our conversation here. One of our yobbers said this: my mind immediately went to a comment in Eve Tushnet's new book. So shout out to Eve Tushnet. We referenced her a couple times last time. We're referencing her a couple times this episode. We're all about Eve lately here in the Yob world. I've still never read a word by this woman, but I will get there. I will get there soon. But he brought up her new book. She has a new book called Tenderness. And he said this: she points out that one way many of us suffered was lack of healthy role models growing up, and therefore ended up diving into unhealthy places to get answers, whether it's porn, hookups, other sketch stuff. I feel like that was the main thing I lacked and desired growing up, was the idea of a side B believer. I've told folks who are counseling youth struggling with their gender and sexuality that the biggest thing I wish I had known was that there was people like me, older than me, and who I could find community with. I feel like that deeply impacted my adolescence for sure. So I guess if I had questions to ask in this podcast, they would be: what role do healthy role models have in helping us through our second adolescence? And how can we be that for others? And I think about that a lot I think when he poses that question, because I think about everything I lacked, and I can definitely get mired in the lack of everything I didn't have, or things that God didn't provide me that he provided millions of other people or little boys growing up. But I think about like, okay, that's what happened what does God want to do with that? Like, what is the beauty that comes from the ashes? Maybe this is my Enneagram 4-ness, like always looking, like I'm always looking for what was the horrible, wretched thing, but then what is the flip side of that? Like, what is God wanting to do from that experience? And I know for me personally, like starting Yob, that's the heartbeat of Yob for me, was when me and my friends started this community. We realized like we realized we were lucky to have a group of people online to talk honestly and openly and to share stories with, and then eventually to meet each other and share life with. But then what about all the other, hundreds, thousands, millions of people who don't have that? And we kind of felt this responsibility, like, let's put something out there. Let's put this website out there into the universe, and hopefully it'll bless people. And hopefully it has after, 6-7 years now. But I think about that. I know in a broad scale, that's kind of what I think about, like as far as being a role model. But obviously I don't want to just be known as someone who did something on the internet, like helps create a blog and does a podcast and organizes Zoom calls or retreats or what have you. Like I definitely want to be a role model to someone locally, or just to have someone look up to me locally. Like that's kind of the hope, is that I've been able to find this presence online, but translating that offline, I think, is, especially as I enter my mid 30s and soon, 40s is right around the corner. Like, I think that's definitely something, if I never have kids of my own, like I definitely would love to be someone as an older side B believer. That's why I've been so grateful for, we gave some love to the older side B believers in our midst, because we need them. We need to know that it's possible to live faithfully with Jesus 50, 40, 60, 70 years. Like, that's a huge deal. So I know that's more and more on my mind the older I get.
One of the criticisms or just comments in the side B community is that there are no fathers in the side B community, because in some ways some of these things are being talked about, at least in the way they're being talked about for the first time. But in some ways, Tom, you and others are pioneers, starting these conversations, opening up these spaces for people to be able to have a safe space to talk, to feel, to be. And I think there are role models. And one of the things we need to do is, learn from the church, learn what to do and what not to do. Leaders get held up as role models in the evangelical church until they screw up. When you start something new, when you talk about things for the first time, you're going to get some things wrong. You're going to stumble. You're going to fall. Look at the New Testament. Paul, the persecutor of the church. Peter denied Christ 3 times, and then even after the resurrection, did things that caused Paul enough grief that Paul called them out in front of the whole church. Role models don't have to be people that are perfect. They're people that run after Jesus, acknowledge when they fall, and get up and run again. And so we need to start championing this idea of, not exalting, yay, I screwed up, but exalting the idea of having a confessional community where we learn and grow from our mistakes and run towards Jesus together. And in that way, even if we don't have people that are 30 years on that have been talking about this for years, we can be the kind of people that we hope our brothers and sisters will be in confessing and running towards Jesus together.
For me, and this is the same experience for many people in our community, is my role model was somebody that I read, and it was Wesley Hill. And that was like my first experience with somebody who was a side B, who seemed healthy, who knew his theology, who was just a faithful Christian. And sadly, for many of us, that's our role model is only through people that we read, and not somebody that we can actually see. But that's way better than nothing. Like, I don't know why I just thought of this, but one time I randomly I was not invited to this conference of Anglican priests where Wesley Hill was speaking, but I definitely snuck in anyway. So I snuck into this Anglican conference and listened to Wesley Hill. It was wonderful. But anyway, but one of the things that I've realized, though, is like in my denomination, I'm one of the few pastors that's out. And I've turned into that role model for people, which is a weird thing to think, because it's like I don't know how to live this life. Like I'm constantly like trying to figure out what a healthy side B person is, and it's weird to think that I'm being a role model. But the thing that I focus on though is like the thing that I can really work on doing is respond in a kind and gentle way to harsh comments or ignorant comments from other people, or harsh actions or ignorant actions. Like I can respond in kindness and gentleness, and that's like one way that I can be a role model, because I'm gonna mess up on so many times. Mess up so many times, but I know that I can try my best to like be kind to to the difficult straight people.
What are you talking about? All straight people are a delight. They're all
Yeah,
a dream.
all made in the image of God. So
no, I'm glad you referenced Wesley Hill. Like, what a great pull. Like I know for so many, he's the first one that people discovered, that people saw a healthy person, someone to give words to all of these groanings. You know, for other people, it's Gregory Cole's, like for this new generation, or for some, it might have been like one of us, like they came across Yob and they read one of our blogs, and like one of us was that person on the internet, you know? And so I'm glad that there's more and more resources becoming available, and hopefully the resources from books and blogs and podcasts, hopefully those translate to real life people, face-to-face people in churches around the country, around the world, that people like many of our Yobbers can have someone to look up to put words to this nebulous thing that all of us had to squash or just ignore or not process until well beyond our first adolescence. Among the many compelling, unavoidable reasons why I follow Jesus is because he was a man, just like me. He was human, just like you. And he didn't just come to earth ascending in the totality of his masculinity and the total nature of his humanity. He came like we all do, as a baby, and grew up as a boy, a child. Jesus, despite being God, also had to learn, also had to grow. We don't get many snapshots into this adolescent Jesus, but what Scripture does provide is encouraging. It gives me a sense that this God I follow, who was also a man, who was also an adolescent boy, gives me a sense of relating to my Savior that is unspeakably beautiful. In Luke 2, Jesus' parents take him into the big city, into Jerusalem, where they encounter Simeon, where they encounter Anna, two people who have waited for the day when they could literally hold the Savior in their arms. And in verse 39 of Luke 2, Scripture reads, "And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him." Later in that same chapter, Jesus, the child, is 12 years old. Once again, he and his parents make a trip into Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. Jesus amazes the people at the temple by what he says, by what he knows. He stays behind after his parents leave. And I can't help but smile at the rebellious nature of this boy, one that could no doubt be found in untold numbers of boys. Rebellion through the light of devotion to his Father above. His parents rush back to Jerusalem when they realize he's missing, and the story picks up in verse 48. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so?
Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And he said to them, Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house? And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And once again, verse 52 echoes that same sense of growth from years ago. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And so, fellow sparrows, whether you feel 5 or 55 years behind your peers, whatever formative things you missed out on during your first adolescence, however wide the void you feel now, know that the Lord our God sees you. He was with you then, and he is with you now. You aren't forgotten, and your story is not a mistake. Your path, potholes and all, has a mighty purpose. Young and old, near and far, we are all still learning and growing on this road, and we are doing it together. May we be blessed by and also be a blessing to our brothers and other spiritual siblings, and not just with our peers, but also for those coming up behind us, those new to the trailhead and still finding the way. May we be the spiritual and emotional role models to another generation that perhaps we never had for ourselves, able to speak words to these unfamiliar groanings of adolescent hearts, able to sit present, able to stand with perspective, and able to stride beyond the awkward and uncomfortable and sometimes lacking, showing a new generation these new possibilities, breathing in this new beauty and living it well.
If my 5 or 6 blogs on Yob have caused such an influence that Will Cooper is a role model, that is a wonderful.
Absolutely,
Well, I have more than
yes.
5 or 6, right? How am
No,
I?
you're way more than that. You're over double digits at this point.
Oh
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah. The key is the momentum, Will Cooper. Can you keep it going? Because we all know you go into hibernation phases. So hopefully you can keep that momentum going for the little boys out there who need a haggard Icelandic whiskey drinking pastor to look up to. Which we all do. You guys, this was a delight, honestly. Like, this was such a great conversation because it was a bit scattered because we talked about a lot of things, but I think it all funneled together to this whole concept that we're all growing up, we're all learning, we're all growing. Some of us have to keep regrowing up, it seems, but I love having these conversations because it's just so, this is one that's just so evident in our community, and I loved the response. Thanks again to all the Yobbers who contributed thoughts. Tried to read as many of them as we could on this episode, which opens the door, though, like I said at the top, opens the door for more conversation. If you want to call the Yob line, or if you want to leave us a comment on our episode post, go over to yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Find the episode 92 post on Second Adolescence, as we've now titled it. And leave us a comment. Tell us a story. Tell us if this rings true for you, as it does for so many in our community. Do you feel like you've had to relive those formative years in some specific way? Let us know. Let us know how that's happened. Let us know the challenges. Let us know how you're growing. Yobbers, you're welcome to comment again. Please comment again. We love hearing from all of you. Hopefully you guys, Ben and Will, who I'm speaking to, hopefully when we stop the recording today, we don't have a conversation that then translates into another topic, because I want those to always be recorded. So you are forbidden from speaking anything meaningful after the recording stops.
I'm the rebellious type, so I'm just not going to listen.
I might be safe. I might be safe this time and make sure I don't hit the stop button until we're actually hanging up. So that's on me too. Alrighty. Well, Ben, Will, so good having you on. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being on and being yourselves. It's always a delight.
As always, thanks for having us, Tom. Always interesting, fun, and in some ways unexpected.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what we talk about next.
Yeah, this was good. I got to reference Handsome Devil multiple times, so
yeah, it's always good when you can. And Ben referenced one of his blogs, the Naked and Unashamed blog, which was, we didn't mention it, but it was our top blog of the year, Ben. Like, and you know that, like, we had a discussion about this. So lots of people Googling, clicking. We'll link all of the things referenced today in our episode notes, so you guys can click away if you're curious about anything that was referenced. But for now, it's time to go. We don't have time. Maybe next time we'll do a third Adolescence, if that's a thing. We'll talk about third Adolescence. No, I hope second is as far as we go. I cannot do Adolescence again. I'm done with Adolescence. But this was a great conversation nonetheless. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it as well. For all your other brothers, my name is Tom.
And I'm Ben.
And I'm Will.
Reminding you that you are not alone. Even the sparrow finds a home. See you next time, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Your Other Brothers podcast. Our show is edited and produced by Thomas Mark Zuniga. If you enjoy our show, consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Your Other Bros. We'd love to hear your story. Comment on this or any of our episodes at yourotherbrothers.com/podcast, or share a story to play back on our show by calling us at 706-389-8009. You can also email us at podcast@yourotherbrothers.com or write to us at Your Other Brothers, P.O. Box 843, Asheville, North Carolina 28802. Finally, if you'd like to further support our storytelling, community building efforts, consider becoming a Yobber. Yobbers pledge monthly on Patreon and receive perks like bonus podcast content, access to a secret Facebook group, regular group calls with fellow patrons and authors, and more. Visit patreon.com/yourotherbros for more information. Until we journey next time, we're glad you're with us.